Some wounds don't start with betrayal. They start with watching somebody else get the love that you've been begging for. Let me tell you something. The story of Jacob and Esau is one we all can relate to.
The eternal word, a light unto the ages, now revealed.
Welcome to the Bible Told with Pastor Rod. Have you ever noticed how some people walk through life like they naturally belong there? You know, like confidence just seems to follow them wherever they go. People listen to them when they talk. People notice them. They respect them. They celebrate them. And then there's the other people. You know, the people who spend their whole life quietly wondering, what is it about me that's not good enough? That feeling changes people, especially when it starts at a young age, especially when it's your family. Because sometimes the deepest wounds, it don't come from your enemies. Sometimes they come from constantly feeling second inside of your own family. Watching somebody else get praised while you sit there pretending it don't bother you, but you know it does. You're watching somebody else become the favorite while you slowly learn how to hide disappointment behind your silence. And after a while, you stop saying anything about it. But internally, it starts doing something to you. You start comparing, you start competing, you start overthinking part of your own self. You start feeling like, well, maybe who I am naturally just ain't enough. And honestly, this is where Jacob's story began. It don't begin with deception. It don't begin with betrayal. It starts with a wound, a quiet wound that grew inside somebody who spent so much time watching another person become everything he thought he wanted to be. And little by little, that kind of pain make people do dangerous things, trying to finally feel chosen. Before the betrayal, before the deception, before Jacob ran into the wilderness alone, there were just two boys growing up inside the same house, twin brothers. But from the very beginning, they were nothing alike. Esau came first, and people noticed him immediately. He grew into the kind of man others naturally respected without trying. Strong hands, rough voice, the smell of the open field still on him when he returned home after hunting. He moved through life with the kind of confidence that made the people around him pay attention when he walked into the room. And Isaac loved that about him. You could see it, the pride in his face whenever Esau returned from the fields, the way his voice changed when speaking to him, the stories, the laughter, the admiration. Esau felt familiar to him. He was strong, he was masculine, he was certain. The kind of son a father openly celebrates. And somewhere nearby, Jacob watched it all, quietly, because Jacob was different. While Esau belonged to the outdoors, Jacob stayed closer to home. Jacob was more thoughtful, more inward, less naturally admired. He wasn't the loud one, wasn't the powerful one, wasn't the son people instantly looked at and thought, there he is. And over time, that difference started becoming something heavier inside the house, because children notice things adults pretend are invisible. Children notice tone, they pay attention, they notice pride, they notice excitement. They notice who gets celebrated without asking for it. And little by little, Jacob began growing up in the shadow of his brother. Imagine sitting at the table every night, watching someone else become everything you secretly wish came naturally to you. Watching your father light up around somebody else while you quietly learn how to stop expecting the same reaction. That kind of thing does something to a person, especially over the years, especially inside family. And then there was Rebekah. Because while Isaac looked at Esau with pride, Rebekah looked at Jacob with protection. She saw what was happening inside her younger son long before anybody else did. The quietness, the insecurity slowly growing underneath the surface, the way Jacob watched his brother, the way comparison slowly started becoming part of his identity. And instead of healing the divide, the family split deeper. One parent pulling toward the son, the other parent pulling toward the other. Love becoming uneven, attention becoming divided, comparison becoming normal. And over time, the house stopped feeling peaceful. Not because people were screaming yet, but because tension was growing underneath everything. The kind of tension families feel long before they admit something is wrong. And somewhere inside of all of this, Jacob started believing something very dangerous, that maybe who he naturally was would never be enough to receive the kind of love and blessings his brother received so easily.
Maybe who I truly am will never be enough to receive the love and blessing my brother has so easily.
The day everything changed didn't begin like some dramatic moment people could see coming. It felt ordinary. The sun hung heavy over the land, heat rising from the earth, wind moving softly through the open fields while Jacob remained near the tent preparing food. Slow movements, quiet movements, the kind of silence that had become normal for him over the years. And somewhere far away, Esau was hunting. Hours passed, then more, until finally, a figure appeared in the distance walking back toward the camp. Esau, but something was different. His steps were slower now, heavy, uneven, sweat covering his face, dirt pressed into his skin, his breathing rough from exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that strips away patience and clear thinking at the same time. And as he got closer, the smell hit him first. Stew, hot food rising into the air while his stomach twisted with hunger. And sitting there beside it was Jacob, watching him. That moment matters because this wasn't random for Jacob emotionally. For years, he had watched his brother naturally possess the things he secretly wanted most: the admiration, the blessing, the birthright. Everything Jacob believed made a man important inside that family belonged to Esau automatically. Esau never had to fight for it. He never had to think about it. He never had to earn it. He was simply born into it. And maybe that's what made this moment feel so dangerous. Because for the first time in their lives, Esau looked weak, not powerful, not admired, not untouchable. He looked human. He looked hungry. And insecurity has a dangerous way of recognizing opportunity when it finally appears. Esau stepped closer. "Give me some of that stew." Simple words. But Jacob didn't answer immediately. You could almost picture the silence between them. Fire crackling softly beneath the pot, the heat moving through the air. Esau standing there exhausted while Jacob stared at the one thing he had spent most of his life standing behind. Then finally, Jacob spoke. "Sell me your birthright first." And just like that, everything shifted. Because now, this wasn't about food anymore. This was about value. This was about identity, about worth, about blessing. Esau looked at him almost irritated at first. Like the question itself sounded ridiculous. His body drained, hunger controlling his thinking stronger than wisdom. What good is my birthright if I die of hunger? And maybe to Esau, it really didn't feel important in that moment. That's the strange thing about blessings people have always possessed naturally. Sometimes they stop seeing their value completely. Because people who grow up emotionally starving often attach enormous meaning to the things they believe will finally make them enough. And slowly, Esau agreed. One impulsive decision, one careless moment, one trade made out of exhaustion and hunger, a bowl of stew for a future. And as Esau sat there eating, Jacob finally held something he had wanted his entire life. But the terrifying thing about insecurity is it never stays full for long. Years pass, but some wounds don't disappear with time. They grow quietly underneath people's lives. And the older Jacob became, the more dangerous the hunger inside of him became too. Because now this wasn't only about the birthright anymore. Now it was about the blessing, the final blessing, the one spoken by a father before death, the words that carried inheritance, authority, future, identity, the kind of blessing that shaped generations. And Isaac was growing old, very old. His eyesight was fading slowly into darkness, his body weaker now. The once strong man became fragile with age, while the family around him quietly felt the weight of something approaching. Everyone knew the moment was coming, especially Rebekah. And one day, she overheard Isaac speaking to Esau. His voice older now, it was slower.
Go out into the field, hunt for me, prepare the meal I love, and afterward I will give you my blessing before I die.
That sentence changed everything. Because the moment Esau left the tent, panic entered Rebekah. You could almost feel how fast the atmosphere inside the house changed. Her breathing quicker now, thoughts racing, fear moving through her like urgency. Because somewhere inside of her mind, she had already decided long ago which son she believed should receive the blessing. It was Jacob. And desperate people make dangerous decisions when they believe time is running out. She quickly went and found Jacob, her voice low, fast, and tense.
Listen carefully.
And from that moment on, the deception began. Not loudly, not quietly, like sin usually does. Goats were brought in from the flock, their skins prepared carefully, clothing taken from Esau's tent, every detail planned with frightening precision. Rebekah moving through the house with determination, while Jacob stood there caught between fear and desire. And honestly, that's what makes this moment feel so human. Because Jacob knew this was wrong. You could see it all over him. The hesitation, the anxiety, the fear in his voice when he finally speaks. But what if he touches me? Not what if this breaks our family, not what if this destroys my brother. What if I get caught? Because insecurity was a way of convincing people survival matters more than integrity. And now Jacob stood there preparing to become someone else, literally. Esau's clothes hanging from his body, goat skin wrapped around his arms and neck to imitate his brother's roughness, the smell of the outdoors pressed into fabric that did not belong to him. And suddenly, the entire story became bigger than deception, because this was a man so desperate to feel worthy, he believed he had to wear somebody else's identity to receive love. And outside Isaac's tent, Jacob stopped walking for a moment, breathing hard, sweat forming across his face. The blessing he had wanted his entire life sat on the other side of that entrance. But deep down inside, part of him already knew, even if this worked, nothing would ever be the same again. The tent was dark. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy before something irreversible happens. Outside, the wind moved softly through the camp while Jacob stood frozen near the entrance, trying to steady his breathing. Esau's clothing hung from his body, goat skin wrapped tightly around his arms and neck. The smell of the fields pressed into the fabric that didn't belong to him. Nothing about this felt natural, and deep down, Jacob knew it. You can imagine his heart pounding inside his chest as he stood there listening to the sound of his father breathing from inside the tent. This was the moment everything had been building toward for years. The blessing, the approval, the thing he had secretly wanted his entire life. And now it sat only a few steps away. But fear had entered the room now too. Because wanting something badly enough doesn't stop people from knowing when they've crossed the line. For a second, Jacob almost looks like he wants to turn around. Almost. But then Rebekah's voice returns to him in his mind, fast, urgent, certain. If you don't do this now, it will belong to Esau forever. And desperation has a dangerous way of silencing conscience when people believe they're running out of time. So finally, Jacob stepped inside. The air inside Isaac's tent felt still, thick with age and weakness. oil lamps flickering softly against the fabric walls while Isaac lay there nearly blind, his body fragile now. Beneath heavy blankets, time had taken strength from him slowly. The once powerful man who had walked through famine, sacrifice, and covenant now looked tired, human, vulnerable. And yet somehow, his presence still carried authority over everyone around him. Jacob moved carefully toward him, carrying the food, trying not to sound nervous, trying not to think too much, trying not to collapse underneath the weight of what he was doing. Then Isaac spoke. Who is it? Simple words, but they hit Jacob like pressure in his chest. And for the first time, the lie had to become real. It is Esau. You can almost feel the silence after he says it. The kind of silence where guilt immediately enters the room. Isaac's face shifted slightly. Something inside him hesitated, because even without sight, something didn't feel right. Come closer. Jacob stepped forward closer. Every moment now felt dangerous. Every breath louder. The room suddenly feeling smaller around him. Isaac listening carefully now, trying to piece together what his fading eyes no longer could. Your voice. Another pause. Your voice sounds like Jacob. And suddenly the entire moment becomes terrifying, because Jacob realizes his father knows something is wrong. You can imagine panic beginning to rise inside of him now. His mind is racing, fear tightening around his thoughts, while Isaac slowly reaches outward with his trembling hands. Come near me so I may touch you. Jacob standing there frozen, while Isaac's hands slowly move across the goat skin wrapped around his arms. There's silence. Just the sound of fabric moving softly in the dim light. Isaac touching the false skin carefully, trying to reconcile what he feels with what he hears. The voice is Jacob's. Another pause, but the hands are Esau's. That line should feel devastating, because this is no longer just deception. This is identity breaking apart inside a father's tent. Jacob standing there pretending to be the one person he spent his whole life comparing himself to, wearing another man's clothing, speaking through another man's identity, hoping somehow that if he performed well enough, he could finally receive the thing he believed belonged only to someone better than himself. And honestly, that's what makes this moment tragic, because Jacob still doesn't believe he can be loved as Jacob. So he keeps lying. Yes, I am Esau. Another lie, then another, then another. And every sentence pulls him deeper until finally Isaac begins speaking the blessing, slowly, powerfully, the words filling the tent like something sacred. Promises of abundance, authority, generations, favor. The very thing Jacob had dreamed about his entire life was finally being spoken over him. And yet there was no peace in the room. There was no joy, no relief, no celebration, only tension. Because somewhere underneath the blessing, Jacob already understood something terrifying. Even if he received the words, he still had no idea who he actually was anymore. Then finally, Isaac finished speaking. The blessing was done. And for one long moment, nobody moved. Jacob standing there breathing heavily beneath Esau's clothing, Isaac exhausted in the dim light of the tent, silence hanging over the room like something sacred had just been broken. And then suddenly, outside the tent, footsteps approached. Esau was home. You know what really makes this story uncomfortable? Jacob got the thing he always wanted, and still something don't feel right. You see, y'all, that's the part people don't talk about enough, because most people think, well, if I could just finally get the thing I've been chasing, then I'd finally feel okay. You know, that relationship, the approval, the success, the validation, the attention, the acceptance. But sometimes people spend so much time chasing a blessing, they lose themselves trying to get it. And honestly, that's exactly what just happened inside that tent. Jacob didn't walk in there as himself. He walked in being a pretender, pretending to be somebody else, because somewhere deep down, he believed that the real version of himself would never be enough to receive that kind of love naturally. And if we're going to be honest, a lot of people live exactly like that. Some people have spent so much time performing for acceptance, they don't even know who they are anymore. When the performance stops, they stop. Every room becomes pressure. Every conversation becomes pressure. Every achievement becomes pressure. Because internally, they still feel like they're competing against some invisible standard they can never fully reach. You know, that kind of insecurity is exhausting. And the scary part about it is people can look successful while secretly feeling completely unworthy inside. That's Jacob right now. He finally received the blessing. He finally received the words from his father. The future is looking beautiful. The approval he thought would finally heal the emptiness that he'd been carrying his whole life. But look at the scene carefully. There's no peace in him. There's no relief, no emotion, no emotional freedom, no joy, only fear. Because deep down inside, Jacob already knows this blessing was built on deception. And the worst part about it, the moment you build identity around pretending, you become terrified of being exposed. That's exactly where Jacob is emotionally right now. He's standing there inside the tent, breathing hard while Esau is on his way home. Can you imagine the panic that's starting to hit him? Heart beating really fast? Because now the reality is coming through the front door. The lies are about to collide with the truth. The performance is about to collapse. In other words, the mask is about to be ripped off. And to be honest, that's one of the most terrifying feelings a human being can experience. The fear of being fully seen after building your life around hiding. Some people know exactly what that feels like. You spend years trying to look strong, trying to look confident, trying to look successful, trying to be the best version of yourself people would finally admire. But inside, man, you tired. You're tired from carrying identities that were never truly yours. And eventually, every mask starts becoming heavy. Every mask starts to come off. That's why this story feels so human. Because Jacob isn't just stealing a blessing. He's losing himself trying to become worthy of one. And now, everything is about to fall apart. Because Esau is walking toward believing he's about to receive the blessing his father promised him. And he ain't got no idea what just happened. No idea his brother is standing inside wearing his clothes. No idea the words meant for him have already been spoken over somebody else. No idea his entire future just changed while he was out hunting. And when he finds out, this story stops being quiet. It's going to become rage, betrayal, family fracture, running, fear, regret. Because wounds inside families rarely stay buried forever. And eventually, something always breaks. Esau was smiling when he returned. That's what made this scene hurt so much. Because he had no idea. The hunt had gone very well. Dust still covering his clothes, sweat along his neck, the smell of the open fields clinging to him as he carried the meal toward his father's tent. You can almost picture the anticipation inside him now. Years of being the favorite son leading toward this moment. The blessing finally waited for him on the other side of that entrance. And inside the tent, Jacob heard the footsteps. Every sound outside suddenly sharper now, louder, more terrifying. Panic beginning to spread through his chest as reality finally caught up to him. Because lies always feel powerful until truth gets close. Jacob moved quickly, almost stumbling as he rushed out from the tent, trying not to be seen. Head low, breathing uneven. fear now completely replacing the desperation that brought him there in the first place. And for one split second, the two brothers nearly crossed paths. Esau walking toward the blessing, Jacob running from it. One unaware, the other unraveling. Then Esau stepped inside. "My father!" Isaac's face shifted immediately. Something in the voice, something in the air, something in his spirit. "Who are you?" At first, Esau probably laughed softly, confused by the question. "It is I, your son Esau." And suddenly, the room changed. You can almost feel the terror that enters Isaac's body in that moment. His breathing tightening, hands trembling violently beneath the blanket as realization began crashing over him all at once. Then Isaac spoke the words that shattered the entire family. Then who was just here? There was silence, heavy, unbearable silence. And now Esau understood. The meal in his hands, suddenly meaningless. His mind trying to catch up to something too painful to process quickly. The blessing, the promise, the future he assumed was waiting for him was already gone. It was stolen by his own brother. And what happens next should feel emotionally violent, because Esau broke, not calmly, not quietly. Broken people don't sound controlled when deep betrayal hits them. A cry came out of him so deep it almost feels inhuman. The kind of pain that doesn't come from anger first, but from a heartbreak, a wounded scream filling the tent while Isaac sat trembling in grief and realization. "Bless me too, Father." Suddenly, Esau no longer feels like the confident brother standing above Jacob. Now he feels human too. A son begging not to be left empty. And Isaac wept. You can imagine the horror settling over him now, realizing his own house had become divided by deception, realizing the son standing before him had been robbed while the other son fled carrying a blessing built on lies. And outside, somewhere in the darkness, Jacob was running from Esau, running from consequences, running from the family he just shattered. But the terrifying thing about wounds like this is, you can run from people, but you can't outrun what's happening inside of yourself. Because somewhere underneath all of the fear, Jacob was beginning to realize something. The blessing he thought would heal him had just destroyed everything around him. Jacob ran until his body started failing him, until his legs felt heavy beneath him, until breathing burned through his chest, until fear became the only thing still pushing him forward through the darkness. And even then, he didn't stop immediately, because terror has a way of keeping people moving along after exhaustion should have already won. The wilderness stretched endlessly around him now, rocks beneath his feet, sharp wind cutting through the night air, the sound of his sandals scraping against dirt, while the world behind him slowly disappeared into darkness. Home was gone now, not physically, not emotionally. The place he grew up, the family he knew, the life he spent years fighting to secure, all of it shattered in one single day. And somewhere behind him, Esau was still screaming. You can imagine those sounds replaying inside of Jacob's mind while he continues to run, his brother's voice breaking apart inside Isaac's tent, the pain in it, the rage, the betrayal. That wasn't just anger Jacob heard back there. This was heartbreak. And honestly, that may have hurt worse than the fear itself, because for the first time, Jacob was finally forced to see what his desperation had actually done. Not in theory, in people. His father trembling in grief, his mother losing both sons at once, Esau broken apart of betrayal, and now Jacob alone in the wilderness carrying the very blessing he thought would finally heal him. But nothing inside of him felt healed. That's the tragedy of this moment. Jacob spent his whole life believing, if I could just obtain the blessing, then I'd finally feel whole. But now he had it, and instead of peace, he felt emptier than ever. The night grew colder as he kept moving through unfamiliar land. No voices around him now, No campfires, no tents glowing in the distance, just darkness swallowing everything in every direction. And little by little, the adrenaline started wearing off. That's when reality became unbearable. Because panic can carry people for a while, but eventually silence catches up. And silence forces people to sit with themselves. Jacob slowed down finally near a cluster of stones scattered across the open ground. His breathing uneven now, sweat cold against his skin, dirt covering his hands and clothing while exhaustion settled deep into his bones. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking back toward nothing. And maybe for the first time in his life, Jacob stopped performing. No pretending now, no competing, no manipulating, no trying to become someone else, just silence, just Jacob. The wind moved softly across the wilderness while he slowly lowered himself onto the ground. Every movement heavy now, emotionally heavy, the kind of heaviness people feel after carrying insecurity for too many years. And honestly, this may have been the loneliest moment of his entire life, because now there was nobody left to impress anymore, nobody left to convince, nobody left to compare himself against. Only the terrifying reality of being alone with the person he actually was underneath all of the striving. That's a frightening place for a human being to reach, especially after spending your whole life building identity around performance. You can almost imagine Jacob staring into the darkness, replaying every moment over and over in his head. His father's trembling voice, Esau's scream, the feeling of goat skin against his arms, the lies, the fears, the blessing itself. And somewhere in the middle of all of that silence, something inside of him finally began breaking. Not externally, internally. Because this is the moment Jacob slowly starts realizing something painful. The blessing was never the thing he truly needed. The real wound was much deeper than inheritance. The real wound was the belief that without the blessing, without approval, without becoming somebody greater, he was nothing. And now the wilderness had stripped everything else away. No mask left, no roles left, no performance left. Only a broken man alone in the dark, finally confronting himself for the very first time. Then, eventually, Jacob reached for one of the stones nearby and pulled it beneath his head. Not because it was comfortable, because he was too exhausted to keep moving. The sky stretched endlessly above him now, cold stars filling the darkness while the wilderness remained silent around him. And there, alone, between fear and exhaustion, between regret and loneliness, Jacob finally closed his eyes. The wilderness was silent, not peaceful, it was empty. The kind of silence that feels almost too large around a person when they've lost everything familiar. Cold wind moved softly across the open land while Jacob lay there alone beneath the night sky, his head resting against stone because exhaustion had finally overpowered fear. And somewhere beyond the darkness, his old life was gone now. His family, his home, his father's voice, his mother's protection, even his brother. They were all gone. All because of choices he could never undo. You can almost imagine the heaviness sitting inside him now as sleep slowly overtook him. The weight of regret pressing deeper than the wilderness around him. His body exhausted, but his mind still restless. Thoughts replaying themselves over and over inside the darkness. The lies, the tent, Esau's scream, Isaac's trembling. And underneath all of it, one terrifying question. Was the blessing even worth this? Then slowly, the world around him faded, and Jacob began to dream. At first, it felt almost impossible to describe, the wilderness still stretching endlessly around him. But now something stood in the middle of it, reaching upward into eternity itself. A stairway, rising from the earth into the heavens, and upon it, figures moving between heaven and earth. Angels ascending, descending, light moving through darkness in complete silence, while the wilderness around Jacob no longer felt empty at all. The atmosphere itself had changed, holy, heavy, unexplainable, like the space between heaven and earth had suddenly opened in the middle of nowhere, and standing above it all was God. That moment should feel emotionally overwhelming because Jacob expected loneliness, expected abandonment, expected judgment, but instead, God came near. And then the voice spoke, not weak, not distant, powerful enough to shake through the soul of a man who had spent his whole life running from insecurity. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. And imagine what Jacob must have felt hearing those words, alone in the wilderness after destroying his family with deception. And yet the voice speaking over him was not rejection. It was covenant. It was promise, presence. The same blessing Jacob spent his entire life trying to steal through manipulation, God was now speaking freely over him in the wilderness. Not because Jacob earned it, not because Jacob performed correctly, not because Jacob finally became worthy, but because God had already decided to remain with him. That changes the entire story, because suddenly Jacob begins realizing something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. The blessing was never truly about Esau, and maybe it was never about performance at all. The voice continued speaking through the dream while heaven itself seemed to move above him. I am with you. I will watch over you. Wherever you go, I will not leave you. And honestly, that line should emotionally break people, because Jacob had spent his whole life believing love had to be earned, believing blessings had to be stolen, competed for, manipulated. But now, here in the middle of failure, in the middle of regret, in the middle of loneliness, God was still speaking presence over him. Not after Jacob fixed himself, but now at his lowest. And suddenly the wilderness no longer felt empty anymore. It felt sacred. Then Jacob's eyes opened. Darkness still surrounding him, cold air across the stones, his breathing uneven, while emotion rushed through him all at once. Fear, awe, confusion, relief. The kind of overwhelming emotion people feel when they realize they are not as abandoned as they thought they were. He sat up slowly, staring into the sky. And then finally, Jacob spoke. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Because Jacob thought he had reached the end of himself, out there all alone in the wilderness. But instead, it became the first place he truly encountered God for himself. And somewhere underneath the stars, for the first time in his life, Jacob no longer felt completely alone. You know what's powerful about this moment? Jacob had finally stopped running long enough to realize that God was still there. Not after he fixed his life, not after he apologized, not after he become a better person, but now, at his worst. And honestly, that changes a lot, because most people secretly believe that God only stays close to the version of them that looks put together, the strong version, the clean version, the confident version, the version that isn't struggling mentally, the version that isn't wrestling with insecurities, regret, shame, anxiety, fear, or exhaustion. But Jacob's story destroys that idea completely, because where does God meet him? He don't meet him in the house. He don't meet him during his success, not while everybody is admiring him. God meets Jacob in the wilderness, where he's alone, he's broken, he's exhausted, he's afraid. And emotionally, he's exposed for the first time in his life. And maybe that's why this scene is hidden so deeply. Because a lot of people, y'all know what it feels like to reach a place emotionally where all the pretending finally stops working. Man, you get tired. Not physically, internally tired. You're tired of performing. You have been tired of comparing yourself to everybody else. You're tired of trying to become the version of yourself you think people would finally love more. And eventually, life got a way of stripping all of that away. That's what the wilderness does. The wilderness removes those distractions. Now you ain't got no applauses. You ain't got no validation, no audience, no performance. Man, it's just you. the person you become when ain't nobody left to impress anymore. And that's terrifying for a lot of people. But some people have spent their whole lives building identity around what they do, how they look, how successful they seem, how accepted they are, how loved they are by others. But eventually, every human being reaches a point where they have to face themselves without all of the noise covering the wounds anymore. And that's Jacob laying there in the dark. Ain't no mask now. No more pretending, no brother to compete with. It's just quietness. And honestly, silence reveals a lot of things people spend years trying to avoid. That's why some people keep themselves consistently distracted, consistently moving, constantly chasing something, because silence forces you to confront what's actually happening inside of you emotionally. And Jacob finally reached that place, the place where all the striving stopped working, the place where he could no longer outrun himself. And what destroys me emotionally about this story is that Jacob expected abandonment there. He thought he was running from everybody. He'd just be, he'd be alone. He'd be abandoned. He probably expected punishment. He probably expected condemnation. But instead, God came closer. That is beautiful, because some of you listening right now honestly believe your brokenness has disqualified you from being loved by God fully. You think, if people really knew how insecure I really am, if people really knew how much I struggle mentally, if people really knew how exhausted I am emotionally, if people knew how much fear controls my thoughts sometimes, then maybe God would step away too. But y'all, look at Jacob. Look at him carefully. God met him in the middle of the mess, not after transformation, before it. And maybe somebody needs to hear this today. Just because you're struggling don't mean God done left you. Just because your life feels messy, it don't mean your story is over. Just because insecurity has shaped parts of your life, it don't mean God cannot still speak purpose over you. Because the most powerful part of this entire scene is that God still called Jacob by name, not Esau. Jacob, the real him, not the performance, not the masked version, not the identity that he kept trying to wear. He called him. And maybe for the first time in his life, Jacob started realizing something. That, man, I ain't got to become nobody else to be seen by God. And honestly, that realization changes people forever. But the story ain't over yet, y'all, because Jacob may have finally encountered God in the wilderness, but he still ain't faced the one thing he's been running from his entire time: Esau. And that's where this story becomes even more intense emotionally, because years are about to pass. Jacob is about to build a brand new life, start a family, new wealth, and new success. Externally, he's looking good. Everything's looking really good. But internally, the wound still isn't healed yet. And be honest with you, some fears don't disappear just because time passes. And eventually, God is going to tell Jacob something terrifying. He's going to tell him, go back. Wait a minute. Yep, back toward the brother he betrayed, back toward the past he tried to outrun, back toward the consequences he buried underneath years of distance and distraction. And suddenly all of that fear is going to return again, because now Jacob has to confront the possibility that the person he hurt the most may still hate him. And that's where this story becomes painfully human, because some people can survive the wilderness seasons, easier than the confrontation. It's easy to run. It's easier to build a new life. It's easy to stay disconnected. But eventually, God will bring people back to the very place where the wound began, not to destroy them, but to heal what they have spent years avoiding. And when Jacob finally sees Esau again, after all of those years, he's going to expect revenge. But what happens next is one of the most emotional moments in the entire Bible. Years passed, and on the outside, Jacob's life looked completely different now. The man who once ran through the wilderness alone had built something for himself: wealth, servants, livestock, wives, children, an entire household moving with him across the land. The insecure younger brother who fled into the night now looked successful in ways nobody could have imagined back then. But some wounds don't disappear just because life gets bigger around them. And deep down, Jacob still carried Esau. That's the thing about unresolved pain. Time can bury it, success can distract you from it, distance can silence it for a while, but internally, it's still there waiting underneath everything. And one day, God spoke again. Simple, direct. Go back. Back? One word, and suddenly years of fear come rushing back into Jacob's chest all at once. Because going back meant facing the one thing he had spent his whole life trying to outrun: Esau. You can imagine the silence that must have fallen over Jacob after hearing those words. His mind immediately returning to the last time he saw his brother. The scream inside Isaac's tent, the rage inside of Esau's eyes, the death threats, the fear that drove him into the wilderness all those years ago. And now, God was telling him to walk back towards it? That is terrifying. Because it's one thing to survive your past, it's another thing to entirely face it. And honestly, Jacob had no idea what waited for him on the other side of the journey. Had Esau's anger faded? Had it grown worse? Would he attack him? Would he reject him? Would he finally take revenge after all of those years? Fear has a way of making people imagine the worst possible ending along before they ever even arrive there. And little by little, panic started growing inside Jacob again. The closer he moved toward home, the heavier his thoughts came. Eventually, Jacob sent messengers ahead toward Esau, hoping to test the waters before arriving himself. You can almost picture the anxiety in him while waiting for them to return. Every hour stretching longer, every thought darker than the last. Then finally, the messengers come back. And the moment they spoke, fear exploded inside Jacob completely. Esau is coming to meet you. And he has 400 men with him. That line should punch you in the chest, because instantly Jacob's mind goes to one place. This is war. This is revenge. This is destruction. You can almost feel the panic swallowing him now. The same insecurity, the same fear, the same terror of rejection returning all over again, no matter how many years had passed. And suddenly, all the success around him meant absolutely nothing. Because deep down, Jacob was still terrified of the wound he left behind. The night before the meeting felt unbearable. Darkness stretching across the camp while everybody slept around him. Wives, children, servants, animals, entire generations connected to a future Jacob thought would heal him. But Jacob himself couldn't rest. Not tonight, because tomorrow he would finally stand face to face with the brother whose life he shattered. And somewhere inside of him, the fear was becoming almost too heavy to carry anymore. The camp was finally quiet, but Jacob wasn't. Sleep had completely left him for now. Fear too heavy inside his chest to let his mind rest. The sound of distant wind moving through the trees, firelight flickering softly across the camp while everyone around him drifted into sleep, unaware of the war happening inside of him. Tomorrow, he would see Esau. Tomorrow, he would stand face to face with the brother he betrayed, the brother he stole from, the brother whose pain had followed him for years, no matter how far he ran. And honestly, Jacob still didn't know if tomorrow would end in forgiveness or bloodshed. You can almost picture him sitting there alone in the darkness, staring into the fire while thoughts tore through him one after another. What if Esau still hates me? What if nothing changed? What if all these years later, I'm still the same broken person I was back then? That's the terrifying thing about unresolved wounds. Eventually, they stop becoming only about the other person. They become about identity. And deep down, Jacob still wasn't sure who he actually was anymore. Then finally, he stood up. The night air cold against his skin while he slowly moved through the sleeping camp. One by one, he sent everyone ahead across the river, his wives, his children, everything he owned, until eventually Jacob was left completely alone. Because this is the first time in the entire story where there is no distraction left around him anymore. No family noise, no movement, no performance, no manipulation, no pretending. Just Jacob alone in the dark with himself. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, a figure appeared. At first, the moment feels almost unreal. Shadows moving in darkness, confusion, sudden movement. Then, without warning, the man grabbed Jacob, and the fight began. Violent, desperate, exhausting. Dust rising from the ground beneath them while Jacob struggled through the darkness against someone stronger than him. Hours passing while neither let go. Sweat, dirt, pain, breathing becoming heavier with every second as the night stretched endlessly around them. And what makes this scene incredibly emotional is that the fight slowly stops feeling physical. It becomes spiritual, personal. Like Jacob is no longer wrestling only with a man, he's wrestling with himself, with fear, with insecurity, with the identity he spent his whole life trying to outrun. Every wound inside him finally surfacing at once in the middle of the night, and still Jacob refused to let go. The man touched Jacob's hips suddenly with supernatural force, and a pain exploded through his body instantly. His leg collapsing beneath him, strength leaving him all at once. But even wounded, Jacob kept holding on. That matters, because now this is no longer about winning. This is about desperation. The kind of desperate that comes from a person who spent their whole life starving emotionally and finally reaches the breaking point where pretending no longer works anymore. Then finally, the voice spoke through the darkness. "Let me go." And Jacob answered with words that revealed the deepest wound of his entire life. "I will not let go until you bless me." That line should feel devastating emotionally, because underneath those words, Jacob is really saying something much deeper. Please tell me I matter. Please tell me I'm enough. Please tell me I don't have to spend the rest of my life pretending anymore. And suddenly, the entire story becomes clear. This was never truly about Esau. It was never truly about the birthright, never truly about the blessing itself. It was always about worthiness. A broken man spending his entire life trying to obtain externally what he never believed internally about himself. Then finally, the question came, what is your name? And this moment should feel holy, because for the first time in history, Jacob stopped hiding. No pretending now, no disguise, no performance, no Esau, just truth. Jacob. Then the voice answered, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel." And in that moment, everything changed. Not because Jacob suddenly became perfect, but because for the first time in his life, God addressed the real him and refused to leave him there broken. The morning came slowly, cold light stretching across the land while Jacob stood there exhausted beside the river, his body still aching from the night before. Every step hurt now, the injury in his hip forcing him to limp as he moved forward toward the moment he had feared for years. But something inside him had changed, not externally, internally. Because for the first time in his life, Jacob was no longer running as somebody else. No disguise, no performance, no pretending, just Jacob. And ahead in the distance, Esau was coming. 400 men moving behind him across the open land, while fear slowly started spreading through Jacob's family. You can imagine the tension in the air now. Servants whispering nervously, children sensing something heavy approaching, the sound of footsteps against dry earth, while Jacob stared at the brother at once he betrayed, finally moving closer and closer again after all of these years. And honestly, Jacob still didn't know what was about to happen. Would Esau attack? Would years of anger finally explode? Would this moment destroy everything all over again? Because some wounds stay alive inside of people for decades. Jacob moved his family behind him slowly, carefully, protective, afraid. Every step toward Esau now feeling heavier than the last. Then finally, Jacob stepped out ahead of everyone else. He was alone. That matters, because this time, he was no longer hiding behind anyone. And as Esau drew closer, Jacob bowed himself to the ground. Once, twice, again, 7 times. The younger brother, who once stole the blessing, now lowering himself completely before the brother he feared most, dust clinging to his clothes, while silence stretched between them across the open field. Can you imagine how this moment felt? Possibly unbearable, because everyone in attendance is expecting violence. Jacob is expecting violence. The entire story has been building toward revenge. Then suddenly, Esau started running. And for one terrifying second, Jacob probably thought this was the end. But when Esau reached him, he wrapped his arms around him tight. No attack, no hatred, no vengeance, only grief, only love, only years of pain finally breaking open all at once between two brothers who had carried the same wound in different ways for most of their lives. And there in the middle of the field, both men cried, tears flowing from both of their faces. This wasn't just reconciliation, it's release. Years of anger, years of fear, years of insecurity, years of running, years of shame, finally collapsing underneath mercy. And honestly, this may be the most beautiful moment in Jacob's entire story, because Jacob spent his whole life terrified he would never truly be accepted as himself. But now, standing wounded, limping, emotionally exposed, with nothing left to hide, he is embraced anyways. Not as Esau, as Jacob. And maybe for the first time in his entire life, Jacob finally understood something. Love was never something he had to steal. You know what makes Jacob's story feel so powerful? It's not that he just stole the blessing. It's that he spent most of his life believing he had to. And that's the wound. That's the part that makes this whole story feel human. Because Jacob didn't just want inheritance. He wanted to matter. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to feel chosen without having to fight for it. And somewhere along the way, comparison convinced him that being himself would never be enough. So what did he do? He did what a lot of y'all do today. You performed. He competed. He manipulated. He wore somebody else's clothing. He borrowed somebody else's identity. And he ran for years carrying a blessing that still couldn't heal the wound inside of him. And honestly, a lot of people know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you never wore goat skin. Maybe you never stood inside a tent pretending to be your brother. But some of you have spent years wearing versions of yourselves that were never really you. Trying to be the strong one, trying to be the successful one, the confident one, the one who has it all together, the one who doesn't need help, the one who never admits how tired you really are. And after a while, the performance gets really heavy, because deep down, the real question was never, well, can I get the blessing? The real question was, am I good enough without pretending? That's why the wilderness mattered. That's why the wrestling mattered. That's why the embrace mattered. God met Jacob as Jacob, broken Jacob, the running Jacob, exhausted Jacob, the Jacob who lied, the Jacob who was afraid, the Jacob who didn't know who he was anymore, and God still spoke promise over him. That's the part that should stay with you, because the world will often make you feel like you have to become somebody else to be loved, like you have to look different, sound different, achieve more, prove more, hide more, perform more, become more. But Jacob's story tells us something deeper. God is not waiting for the fake version of you to show up. He is meeting the real you, the tired you, the wounded you, the you that still carries family pain, the you that still tries to compare, the you that still wonders if you're good enough. And maybe that's why Esau's embrace is so powerful, because Jacob walked toward his brother expecting revenge, but instead, man, he received mercy. He walked forward limping, exposed, afraid, with nothing left to hide behind, and he was still embraced, not as the person he pretended to be, but as himself. And maybe that's the healing some of you have been searching for your whole life. Not becoming somebody else, not earning your worth, not fighting for a seat at the table where you were already seen by God, but finally believing. You do not have to steal what God already knows how to give. You do not have to become somebody else to be worthy of love. You don't have to spend the rest of your life living from a wound that God has already healed. Because Jacob walked away with a limp, but he also walked away with a new name. And sometimes healing doesn't mean you leave without scars. Sometimes healing means the scar no longer gets to define you. The wound doesn't get the final word. The rejection doesn't get the final word. The comparison doesn't get the final word. The family pain doesn't get the final word. God does. And maybe today, that's where your story starts changing too. And after that day, Jacob never walked the same way again. Not because the pain disappeared, not because the scars vanished, but because something inside of him had finally changed. The man who once spent his whole life chasing through performance now walked forward differently. He was slower, he was wounded, he was humbled, and he was honest. No longer hiding behind another identity, no longer running from himself, just Jacob. No, Israel. And maybe that limp became the most important part of his story, because every step afterward reminded him of the night he stopped pretending, the night he stopped running, the night God met him in the middle of his brokenness and refused to leave him there. And honestly, y'all, that's the beautiful thing about healing. Sometimes people think healing means the scars disappear completely, but sometimes healing looks like this. You still remember the pain, but the pain no longer controls who you are. You still carry the mark, but the mark no longer defines your worth. And Jacob spent the rest of his life walking with that reminder, not as proof he was weak, but as proof that even broken people can be transformed. And remember, when the world is still trying to figure things out, the Bible told it first.